I'm Maya Campbell, and I should have checked the weather forecast before dragging my podcast equipment across downtown Laredo. The winter storm hit like a freight train, turning the streets into rivers and my expensive recording gear into potential scrap metal. My blonde hair whipped across my face as I sprinted toward the nearest shelter, clutching my waterlogged equipment bag. The vintage tailor shop's narrow awning offered barely enough cover for one person. I pressed myself against the weathered door, gasping as lightning split the sky. "Damn it all," I muttered, watching rainwater drip from my microphone case. That's when I heard the key in the lock behind me. The door opened, and I stumbled backward into someone's solid. Warm hands steadied me as I turned to face a woman with brunette hair streaked silver, her blue eyes wide with surprise. "Sorry, I didn't realize." She paused, taking in my drenched state. "You look like you've been swimming upstream." "More like drowning downstream." I shifted my equipment bag, acutely aware of how close we stood under the small awning. "Maya Campbell. I host a podcast about hidden stories in small towns. Sydney Long." Her voice carried a slight rasp, like whiskey over ice. "I own this shop." Rain hammered the awning above us, creating an intimate cocoon. Sydney's presence felt magnetic in a way I couldn't explain. Her fingers were delicate but strong, and when she gestured toward my soaked equipment, I caught myself staring. "That looks expensive," she said. "Was expensive. Now it's probably worthless." Sydney studied my face with unusual intensity. "Come inside. Let's see what we can salvage." I followed her into the warm shop, breathing in the scent of old fabric and something distinctly feminine. Vintage sewing machines lined wooden tables, and bolts of rich cloth created colorful towers against the walls. Sydney moved through the space like she belonged there, which of course she did. "Set everything on this table." She cleared space near a small heater. The warmth might help dry things out. As I unpacked my gear, Sydney watched with genuine curiosity. Her shop felt like a sanctuary from the storm raging outside, and from the chaos my career had become lately. My podcast was struggling, my savings were nearly gone, and now this. "What kind of hidden stories?" she asked, settling into a chair beside me. "People who've lived differently, who've had to adapt, survive, reinvent themselves." I plugged in my recorder, hoping for signs of life. Everyone has secrets, especially in small towns. Something flickered across Sydney's expression. "That's quite an assumption." "Not an assumption. Experience." The recorder's light flickered weakly. "Take you, for instance. Vintage tailor shop in modern Laredo? There's definitely a story there." Sydney laughed, but it sounded slightly forced. "Nothing mysterious about mending clothes." "Maybe not. But there's something about the way you move in this space, like you're hiding in plain sight." Our eyes met, and I felt something electric pass between us. Not attraction exactly, but recognition. Like we were both keeping similar secrets. Thunder crashed overhead, making us both jump. Sydney's hand briefly touched mine as we reached for the same piece of equipment. "Sorry," she whispered, but didn't pull away immediately. Neither did I. The next morning, I stared at my silent recording equipment with growing panic. My podcast deadline loomed, and every piece of gear remained stubbornly dead. I'd built my entire career on telling stories that mattered, and now I couldn't even record my own voice. I found myself standing outside Sydney's shop before opening hours, clutching a desperate proposal in what remained of my pride. The door chimed as Sydney appeared, coffee in hand. She looked surprised but not unwelcome. "Equipment still dead?" she asked. "Completely. Look, I know this sounds crazy, but I need somewhere quiet to record today's show. My apartment's too noisy, and the library's booked solid." I took a breath. "I can pay rent, whatever you think is fair." Sydney studied me over her coffee cup. "What's your show about?" "Local artisans, people who keep traditional crafts alive in a digital world." I gestured toward her workshop. "Actually, you'd be perfect for it." Something shifted in her expression. "I don't do interviews." "Why not? You've clearly got stories to tell." "Some stories are better left untold." But curiosity won. She unlocked the door and led me inside. The morning light streaming through tall windows transformed the shop into something magical. Bolts of silk caught the sun like jewels, and antique sewing machines gleamed like sculptures. "You can set up in the back corner," Sydney said. But keep it quiet. I have customers. As I arranged my backup recorder and borrowed microphone, Sydney began her daily routine. I found myself watching her hands as she sorted through fabric samples, noting how each movement was precise and graceful. When she caught me staring, heat rushed to my cheeks. Occupational hazard, I said. I noticed details. What kind of details? The way you handle fabric like it's alive. How you've positioned every tool within exact reach. Your workspace tells a story about who you are. Sydney's fingers paused on a bolt of midnight blue silk. And what story does it tell? Someone who's traveled, who's worked with expensive materials for demanding clients. This isn't just alterations and hemming. You're observant. I have to be. People reveal themselves in small moments. As the day progressed, Sydney's reserve began cracking. She answered questions about different fabrics and techniques, her voice growing warmer. When she described working with traveling theater companies years ago, her entire face transformed. That sounds incredible, I said during a break in recording. Why did you stop? Life changed. I changed. She smoothed a piece of emerald velvet. Sometimes you have to choose between dreams and survival. But you kept sewing. Sewing saved me. The weight in her words made me look up. Our eyes met across the workspace, and something passed between us that felt larger than casual conversation. Sydney moved closer, ostensibly to show me an intricate beadwork pattern, but her proximity made my pulse quicken. This is museum quality, I whispered, studying the delicate stitching. You're an artist. I'm a seamstress. You're both. Sydney's hand brushed mine as she pointed to a particular design element. The contact lasted a heartbeat too long to be accidental. When I looked up, her blue eyes held an intensity that made breathing difficult. Maya. Her voice was barely audible. Yes? Nothing. Just thank you for seeing what others miss. The moment stretched between us, charged with unspoken possibilities. Then the shop bell chimed, announcing a customer, and Sydney stepped back so quickly I wondered if I'd imagined everything. But as she moved to greet her client, she glanced back at me with an expression that promised our conversation wasn't over. 2 days later, I returned with my properly functioning equipment and a proposal that had kept me awake all night. Sydney was hunched over an intricate embroidery project, silver reading glasses perched on her nose. I want to interview you officially, I said without preamble. For the podcast. She looked up, fingers still holding delicate thread. I told you I don't do interviews. This isn't just any interview. You're exactly what my audience needs to hear, a master craftsperson keeping tradition alive. I set down my recorder. Please. 1 hour. Something in my voice must have convinced her, because she nodded slowly. As I set up my equipment, Sydney continued working on what looked like a vintage theater costume. The fabric was deep burgundy silk, and her stitches formed intricate patterns that seemed to dance in the afternoon light. Tell me about this piece, I began, hitting record. It's a reproduction. The original was destroyed in a fire 20 years ago. Her voice carried a particular sadness. I worked on the first version when I was with the Mercury Theater Company. You traveled with them? For 3 years. We performed in small towns across Texas, bringing Shakespeare and Chekhov to places that rarely saw live theater. Sydney's fingers never stopped moving as she spoke. I designed and maintained all the costumes. What made you leave? A pause. The shop fell silent except for the gentle hum of the heater and Sydney's needle moving through fabric. Sometimes you realize you're living someone else's dream instead of your own. I leaned forward, sensing a deeper story. What was your dream? Stability, safety, a place to belong. She set down her work and looked directly at me. The theater was magical, but it was also lonely. Always moving, never settling, never allowing yourself to get too close to anyone. Her words hit me unexpectedly hard. My podcasting career kept me similarly isolated, always chasing the next story, the next interview. Never staying anywhere long enough to build real connections. Do you miss it? I asked. I miss the artistry, creating something beautiful from nothing. Sydney stood and moved to a rack of finished garments, but I don't miss the loneliness. Are you lonely now? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Too personal for a podcast interview, but Sydney didn't seem to mind. Less than I was, she said softly, her eyes finding mine. After I finished recording, Sydney insisted on measuring me for a jacket she'd been sketching. She claimed it was payment for using her space, but something in her manner suggested otherwise. Arms up, she instructed, wrapping a tape measure around my waist. Her touch was professional but gentle, hands skimming over my ribs and shoulders as she took measurements. When she reached around me to measure my chest, her body pressed against my back for just a moment. Sorry, she whispered, but didn't step away immediately. I found myself holding my breath, acutely aware of her nearness. The scent of her perfume mixed with the shop's familiar smells of fabric and thread. Sydney. I turned in her arms, the tape measure still draped around us. She looked up at me, her blue eyes wide and uncertain. We stood frozen like that, faces inches apart, the measuring tape connecting us like some invisible thread of fate. She began, but never finished. Instead, she rose slightly on her toes and I leaned down to meet her. Our lips touched softly, hesitantly, as if we were both afraid the other might disappear. The kiss lasted only seconds before we broke apart, both breathing harder than we should have been. I'm sorry, Sydney said, stepping back and letting the tape measure fall. I don't know what... Don't apologize. I caught her hand gently. Please don't apologize. We stared at each other in the golden afternoon light, surrounded by bolts of fabric and the quiet magic of her shop, both of us knowing something fundamental had just shifted between us. That kiss changed everything and nothing. Sydney and I fell into a careful dance around each other, finding excuses for me to spend every evening at her shop. Officially, I was helping with bookkeeping and organizing her customer database. Unofficially, I was addicted to her presence. Your filing system is chaos, I said, sorting through receipts while Sydney worked on alterations. It's artistic disorder, she replied, without looking up from her sewing machine. I know where everything is. The receipt for Mrs. Henderson's bridesmaid dress is filed under miscellaneous purple items. Sydney's laugh was like music. Purple is a very specific category. These quiet evenings became precious to me. While she worked, I'd organize her business records, occasionally stealing glances at her concentrated face. The way she bit her lower lip when tackling difficult stitching. How she unconsciously tucked a strand of silver-streaked hair behind her ear. One evening, she broke our unspoken rule about not mentioning what happened between us. Maya, about the other day, we don't have to talk about it, but I want to. She set down her work. I haven't felt that kind of connection in a very long time. Neither have I. I'm 52 years old. I'm 28. So what? So everything. Sydney moved to the small kitchenette in the back room. I've made my peace with being alone. Have you really? She paused while making tea, her shoulders tense. I thought I had. I joined her in the cramped space, close enough to see the fine lines around her eyes that somehow made her more beautiful, not less. What are you afraid of? I asked gently. Getting hurt. Hurting you. This town isn't exactly progressive. Let me worry about myself. Sydney turned to face me, tea forgotten. You don't understand what it's like to hide who you are for decades. To build walls so high you forget there's a world outside them. Then let me help tear them down. Before she could protest, I kissed her. Not the hesitant brush of lips from before, but something deeper and more certain. Sydney melted into me, her hands finding my face, and this time neither of us pulled away quickly. When we finally separated, breathing hard, Sydney's carefully controlled composure had cracked completely. Maya, she whispered against my lips. I know. This is dangerous. I know that too. We moved to the small couch in her back room, decades of caution warring with desire neither of us could ignore any longer. Sydney's hands trembled as she traced my jawline, as if memorizing every detail. I haven't done this in so long, she confessed. We don't have to do anything you're not ready for. But when she kissed me again, hungry and desperate, I knew she was as far past ready as I was. Our bodies found each other with surprising ease, as if we'd been made to fit together. Years of loneliness melted away under gentle touches and whispered endearments. Sydney's skin was soft and warm beneath my fingers, and when she gasped my name, it sounded like prayer and promise combined. Afterward, we lay tangled together on the narrow couch, Sydney's head on my chest, both of us afraid to speak and break the spell. "What happens now?" she finally asked. "I don't know." I stroked her hair. "But I want to find out. People will talk. Let them." Sydney lifted her head to look at me, her blue eyes still uncertain but warmer than I'd ever seen them. "You make it sound so simple. Maybe it is." She smiled then, the first truly unguarded expression I'd seen from her. "Stay tonight? Try to make me leave." As twilight settled over Laredo, we held each other close, two women who'd found something unexpected in the midst of carefully constructed lives. Outside, the world continued its relentless pace, but inside Sydney's shop, time felt suspended, holding us safely in its embrace. 3 weeks into whatever we were calling this relationship, my podcast revenue hit rock bottom. Sydney found me staring at my laptop screen in despair, bank account showing numbers that made my stomach clench. "I need a second job," I admitted. "Something that pays weekly." "What kind of work?" "Anything. Waitressing, retail, bartending." I closed the laptop with more force than necessary. My pride can't pay rent. Sydney was quiet for a moment, then pulled out her phone. "My friend Carlos manages Rodeo Ranch downtown. They need weekend bartenders." "The country and western place?" "It's busy Friday through Sunday. Good tips." She paused. "Though it's not exactly your scene." She was right. Rodeo Ranch catered to Laredo's straight crowd, complete with mechanical bull and line dancing. But desperate times called for uncomfortable measures. 2 days later, I stood behind the bar in borrowed cowboy boots and a shirt that showed more cleavage than I preferred, learning to pour whiskey shots in beer drafts. The Saturday night crowd was loud, friendly, and completely oblivious to my sexual orientation. "You're getting the hang of it," Carlos shouted over the music. "Just smile and pour. These folks aren't complicated." By midnight, I'd earned more in tips than my podcast made in a week. My feet ached and my ears rang, but for the first time in months, financial panic wasn't eating at my chest. That's when I spotted her. Sydney sat at the far end of the bar, nursing a bourbon and looking completely at ease in this heterosexual haven. She wore jeans and a simple blouse, her hair loose around her shoulders, and if I hadn't known better, I'd have assumed she belonged here. Our eyes met across the crowded room. She raised her glass slightly, a secret smile playing at her lips. During my break, I slipped over to her corner of the bar. "Fancy meeting you here," I said, trying to sound casual. I could say the same. Sydney's voice held amusement. "How long have you been coming to Rodeo Ranch?" "This is my second shift ever." "How long have you been coming here?" "About 6 months." I stared at her. 6 months? You've been hanging out at a straight bar for 6 months? It's surprisingly relaxing. Nobody expects anything from you. No one asks personal questions. She took a sip of bourbon. I can just exist without explanation. The revelation hit me like cold water. Sydney had been hiding in plain sight, using this aggressively heterosexual environment as camouflage for her own loneliness. "You've been hiding here." "We're all hiding somewhere, Maya." Before I could respond, a drunk cowboy stumbled toward us, clearly interested in Sydney despite the 20-year age difference. "Hey there, gorgeous. Buy you a drink?" Sydney's expression shifted to polite disinterest. "I'm fine, thanks." "Come on, don't be shy." He leaned closer, alcohol heavy on his breath. "Pretty lady like you shouldn't drink alone." I stepped between them smoothly, my bartender persona sliding into place. "The lady said she's fine. Mind your business, sweetheart." "Actually, this is my business." I gestured toward my uniform. "And I'm asking you to respect our customers' boundaries." The man looked back and forth between us, something clicking in his beer-addled brain. "Wait a minute. You two are..." "We're what?" Sydney's voice carried steel beneath the silk. But instead of backing down, recognition dawned in his eyes, not suspicion about our relationship, but something else entirely. "You're both regulars," he said slowly. I've seen you here before, together. My heart stopped. Sydney and I had never been here together before tonight. He was confusing us with other women, but his drunken observation landed dangerously close to truth. Sydney stood gracefully, finishing her bourbon in one smooth motion. Time for me to head home. She placed money on the bar, then looked directly at me. Walk me to my car? It wasn't really a question. We left through the back exit, stepping into the cool Texas night. The parking lot was dimly lit, filled with pickup trucks and motorcycles. That was close, I said. Too close. Sydney unlocked her car, then turned to face me. Maya, I need to tell you something. What? I've been coming here because it felt safe, but seeing you tonight, watching you work, pretending we're strangers, she stepped closer. I don't want to hide anymore. Before I could respond, she kissed me against her car door, right there in the Rodeo Ranch parking lot where anyone could see us. That kiss in the parking lot changed everything. What had been careful stolen moments in Sydney's shop transformed into something bolder and more dangerous. We began meeting at Rodeo Ranch during my shifts, playing an elaborate game of pretending to be strangers while communicating through glances and coded conversations. Sydney would arrive around 10, always ordering the same bourbon, always sitting where I could see her. We developed a silent language of meaningful looks and casual comments that meant everything and nothing to eavesdropping customers. Another round? I'd ask, refilling her glass. Only if you recommend it, she'd reply, her fingers brushing mine as she reached for the drink. The double meanings made my pulse race even as we maintained perfect facades. Other regulars began treating Sydney like part of the furniture, which gave us cover for longer conversations. You're getting better at this, she said during a quiet Tuesday shift, when we had more freedom to talk. At bartending, or at pretending I don't know you? Both. Her smile was soft and private. Though I prefer the real you. You mean the one who's completely obsessed with a certain seamstress? That's the one. These stolen hours at the bar became precious to us. After closing time, when Carlos finished counting the till, Sydney and I would meet at her car and drive to secluded spots around Laredo, talking until dawn about everything and nothing. One night, parked by the Rio Grande with the windows down and stars reflecting off the water, our conversation turned deeper than usual. Tell me about your first relationship, Sydney said, her hand finding mine in the darkness. College roommate, Sarah Martinez. Lasted 6 months before she decided she liked men better. I squeezed Sydney's fingers. What about you? Theater company manager, Victoria. She was brilliant and complicated and absolutely convinced our relationship would destroy both our careers. Sydney's voice grew quiet. She wasn't entirely wrong. Is that why you stopped traveling? Partially. When Victoria ended things, staying felt impossible. Sydney turned to face me. I've spent 20 years building walls to avoid feeling that kind of pain again. And now? Now I'm terrified and exhilarated and completely out of my depth. I leaned across the center console to kiss her, tasting bourbon and honesty on her lips. What started as comfort became something hungrier, more desperate. Sydney's hands found my hair, pulling me closer as the kiss deepened. Maya, she whispered against my mouth. I know. The back seat. We moved awkwardly but urgently, limbs tangling as we settled into the cramped space. Sydney's touch was confident now, no longer hesitant, and when she ran her hands beneath my shirt, I gasped her name into the Texas night. Time suspended as we discovered each other again, more thoroughly than the hurried encounter at her shop. Sydney's soft sounds of pleasure mixed with night birds and distant traffic, creating a symphony of intimacy that felt sacred despite our surroundings. Her skin was luminous in the starlight, and when she arched beneath my touch, I understood why people wrote poetry about moments like these. Afterward, we lay tangled together, my head on her shoulder, both breathing hard. Someone could have seen us, Sydney murmured, but without real concern. Let them. You're braver than I am. I'm motivated. There's a difference. Sydney's laugh vibrated through her chest. What motivates you? You, this. The way you make me feel like I've been sleepwalking my whole life until now. She was quiet for so long I thought I'd said too much, then her arms tightened around me. My colleague Jennifer stopped by the shop today, she said. Asked if I was seeing anyone. What did you tell her? That my personal life wasn't her concern. Sydney paused. But she knew, Maya. Something in her tone suggested she already knew. The implication hung between us. In a town like Laredo, secrets had short shelf lives. Are you worried? I asked. Terrified, but also relieved somehow. Sydney's fingers traced patterns on my arm. Hiding is exhausting. We drove back to town as the sun was rising, both understanding that our secret relationship had evolved into something that would soon be impossible to conceal. The complications started with a phone call that would change everything. I was organizing receipts in Sydney's back room when my phone buzzed with unknown number from Austin. Maya Campbell? This is Rebecca Martinez from Austin Public Radio. We've been following your podcast about small-town artisans. My heart stopped. Austin Public Radio was every podcaster's dream opportunity. We'd like to discuss bringing your show to our network, full production support, marketing budget, regular salary. Rebecca's voice was professional but warm. When could you come to Austin for a meeting? After hanging up, I stared at my phone in disbelief. 6 months ago, this call would have sent me packing immediately. Now, the thought of leaving Laredo felt like betraying something precious. Sydney emerged from the front of the shop, immediately reading my expression. Good news or bad news? Austin Public Radio wants my show. I set down the phone carefully. Full network support. Real money. Something flickered across Sydney's face. That's wonderful. You've worked so hard for this. Sydney. No, really. This is your dream, Maya. She moved to her sewing machine, hands busy with unnecessary adjustments. You can't turn down an opportunity like this. I haven't decided anything yet. What's to decide? This is everything you've wanted. Her tone was too casual, too controlled. I recognized the walls going back up. Is it everything I want? Sydney's hand stilled on the fabric. Don't make this about us. Why not? We're part of each other's lives now. For how long? She turned to face me. Her blue eyes shuttered. Maya, you're 28 years old. You should be chasing dreams, not settling down with a middle-aged seamstress in a small Texas town. That's not your decision to make, isn't it? I've lived this life long enough to know when someone's sacrificing their future for comfortable present. The words hit like physical blows. Is that what you think this is? Comfortable? I think you're scared to take the risk. I think you're scared I might actually choose you. We stared at each other across the shop, 20 years and a dozen unspoken fears stretching between us. The silence grew until it became unbearable. Meanwhile, the whispers were starting around town. Mrs. Henderson mentioned seeing my car at Sydney's shop an awful lot lately. Carlos asked why Sydney had started coming to Rodeo Ranch so regularly. Even my landlord made pointed comments about my new social circle. The tension came to a head during my Saturday shift at the bar. Sydney arrived later than usual, looking strained. She ordered her bourbon but barely touched it, lost in thought. Around midnight, a group of regulars started gossiping loud enough for the entire bar to hear. That seamstress woman's been acting strange lately, said Janet from the feed store. Always rushing around, distracted. My cousin says she heard Sydney's got herself a girlfriend. My hands froze while drying glasses. Sydney's eyes met mine across the room, both of us trapped in public scrutiny. Wouldn't surprise me, added Janet's friend. Never saw her with men, even when she was younger. Always seemed a little different. Different how? The drunk cowboy from weeks earlier leaned into their conversation. Like that bartender girl? Pretty thing, but something odd about her too. Heat rushed to my face as their speculation grew more pointed. Sydney set down her bourbon and stood, her dignity intact despite the circumstances. Time to go, she said to no one in particular. But as she walked toward the exit, Janet called out with false sweetness. Have a good evening, Sydney. Say hello to your friend for us. The implication was crystal clear. Sydney stopped, turned, and looked directly at the gossiping women. I'll be sure to do that, she said with quiet steel in her voice. In the parking lot afterward, we faced each other under the neon Rodeo Ranch sign. This is exactly what I was afraid of, Sydney said. They're just gossiping. it doesn't mean anything. It means everything. This is how it starts, Maya. The whispers, the pointing, the judgment. She wrapped her arms around herself. I've built a life here. A business, a reputation, and now what? You're happier than you've been in years. You said so yourself. Happiness doesn't pay bills or keep customers coming to my shop. So we hide forever? Sneak around like teenagers? We're adults. We should know better. The words hung in the air between us, cruel and final. I felt something breaking in my chest. Sydney, please. Go to Austin, Maya. Take the job. Build the life you deserve. She got in her car and drove away, leaving me standing alone under the harsh parking lot lights, our relationship crumbling under the weight of fear and small-town pressure. The Austin meeting went exactly as I expected. Rebecca Martinez was brilliant, the studio was state-of-the-art, and the contract terms were more generous than I dared hope. They wanted to expand my local artisan concept into a national series, traveling to small towns across America to uncover forgotten crafts and hidden stories. We'd start you at $60,000 annually, Rebecca explained over coffee in their sleek conference room. Full benefits, production team, travel budget, the dream package for an independent podcaster. 6 months ago, I would have signed immediately. Instead, I found myself stalling, asking for time to consider their offer. Rebecca seemed surprised, but agreed to give me 2 weeks. Back in Laredo, Sydney and I maintained careful distance. She threw herself into work, taking on additional alterations and staying at the shop until well past closing. I continued my shifts at Rodeo Ranch, but she stopped coming. The bourbon stool at the end of the bar remained empty, a constant reminder of what I'd lost. You've been moping for weeks, Carlos observed during a slow Tuesday shift. What's eating you? Nothing specific. Just life decisions. Does this have anything to do with your seamstress friend? Haven't seen her around lately? I looked up sharply. What do you mean? Sydney. She used to come in regular, always sat at the end there. Carlos gestured toward her empty spot. You two seemed friendly. We were. Past tense. Carlos studied my expression with the wisdom of someone who'd tended bar for 20 years. Whatever happened, pride's expensive medicine. Sometimes the cure costs more than the disease. That weekend I made my decision. Or tried to. I drove to Sydney's shop Saturday evening after closing time, determined to have an honest conversation about our future. But when I arrived, the lights were off, and a for sale sign hung in the window. My heart stopped. I called Sydney's phone, but it went straight to voicemail. In desperation, I drove to her apartment, only to find a moving truck parked outside. Sydney was loading boxes into the back, moving with efficient purpose. When she saw me approaching, she paused but didn't speak. You're leaving, I said, stating the obvious. San Antonio. My cousin has connections with theatrical costume companies. Better opportunities for someone with my background. You didn't tell me. What was there to say? You're taking the Austin job. I'm starting fresh somewhere else. Clean breaks are easier. I watched her load another box, feeling helpless. Sydney, we need to talk about this. There's nothing to discuss. You were right about hiding, Maya. I've spent too many years building walls and living in fear. She straightened, meeting my eyes directly. But I can't do it here anymore. Too many people know, too many assumptions. I need a fresh start. What if I don't take the Austin job? Then you're letting fear make your decisions instead of logic. Sydney's voice was gentle but firm. That radio opportunity is everything you've worked toward. Don't sacrifice your future for a relationship that was probably temporary anyway. Temporary? The word hit like a slap. Maya, be realistic. You're 28 and building a career. I'm 52 and set in my ways. Different life stages, different priorities. I thought what we had was real. It was real, but real doesn't always mean sustainable. We stood in the fading daylight, years of difference and weeks of misunderstanding creating distance that felt insurmountable. Sydney looked tired but resolved, like someone who'd made peace with disappointing decisions. I'll always be grateful for what we shared, she said quietly. You reminded me what it felt like to be truly happy. Sydney, go to Austin, Maya. Build something amazing. Don't look back. She disappeared into her apartment, leaving me standing beside the moving truck with boxes labeled for a life I wouldn't be part of. That night at Rodeo Ranch, I worked my shift in a daze. The bar was busy, but I moved through motions automatically, pouring drinks and making change while my heart felt hollow. Around 11, Janet from the feed store appeared at the bar, clearly tipsy and looking for gossip. "Heard your seamstress friend's leaving town," she said with false sympathy. "Sudden decision, wasn't it? People move all the time." "Sure they do. Especially when certain rumors start making rounds." Janet leaned closer conspiratorially. "Probably for the best, don't you think? Some relationships just aren't natural for a small town like ours." Something snapped inside me. Months of hiding, weeks of heartbreak, and now this smug assumption that Sydney was running because of people like her. "You know what's not natural?" I said, setting down the glass I was cleaning with deliberate control. "Spending your time gossiping about other people's private lives instead of focusing on your own." Janet blinked, surprised by my directness. "Sydney Long is the most talented artisan I've ever met, and one of the kindest people in this town. If she's leaving, it's because narrow-minded busybodies made her feel unwelcome for being different." The conversation around us quieted as other customers tuned in. "And for the record," I continued, my voice carrying across the suddenly silent bar, "Sydney wasn't just my friend. She was the woman I fell in love with. So if you have questions about unnatural relationships, maybe start with your own marriage before judging ours." The silence at Rodeo Ranch was deafening. Janet's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish, while other patrons stared at me with expressions, ranging from shock to grudging respect. Carlos appeared beside me, his hand briefly touching my shoulder in solidarity. "Maya's right," he said to the room. "Y'all need to mind your own business." I finished my shift with shaking hands but unexpected pride. Word of my declaration would spread through Laredo by morning, but for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe freely. The next day, I called Rebecca Martinez in Austin. "I'm honored by your offer," I told her, "but I have to decline. My life is here in Laredo." "Are you sure? This opportunity won't come again." "I'm sure. But thank you for believing in my work." After hanging up, I drove straight to Sydney's apartment. The moving truck was gone, but her car remained in the driveway. I found her on the front porch, looking exhausted and conflicted. "Heard you made quite a speech last night," she said without looking up. "News travels fast. Janet Martinez called half the town." Sydney finally met my eyes. "Why, Maya? Why throw away your Austin opportunity to defend someone who's already leaving?" "Because I love you. Because what we have is worth fighting for. Because I'm tired of letting fear make decisions for both of us." Sydney was quiet for a long moment. "The moving truck comes back tomorrow. Then we have tonight to figure this out." "You turned down Austin Public Radio." "I did." "You're insane." "Probably." Sydney stood, closing the distance between us. "They're going to make our lives difficult. The gossips, the disapproving looks, the lost business." "Let them try. You'll get tired of it eventually. Small-town prejudice wears people down." "Sydney." I took her hands, feeling the strength and gentleness that had first drawn me to her. "I've spent my entire career telling stories about people who refuse to disappear, who keep their traditions alive despite changing times. You're one of those people. We're one of those people." Her eyes filled with tears. "I'm scared. So am I. But I'm more scared of losing you." Sydney kissed me then, right there on her porch in broad daylight, where any neighbor could see. When we broke apart, she was smiling through her tears. "I already called the San Antonio people. Turned down their offer." "When?" "This morning. After Carlos called to tell me what you'd said at the bar." She laughed shakily. "Apparently, I'm as insane as you are. So what now?" "Now we stay. We build something here together." Sydney gestured toward her packed boxes. "I've got a shop to unpack and a reputation to rebuild. Interested in helping? Only if you let me keep doing my podcast from your back room." "Deal. But we're soundproofing that corner properly." 6 months later, Sydney's shop buzzed with renewed energy. She'd returned with a fierce determination to be authentically herself, and customers responded to her confidence. We worked side by side most evenings, her sewing costumes for the local community theater while I recorded stories about artisans who refused to compromise their truth. My podcast evolved too. Instead of traveling for stories, I focused on the hidden narratives right here in Laredo. Sydney became a regular subject, sharing tales of theater days and textile traditions that captivated my growing audience. The town adjusted, as small towns do. Some customers stayed away initially, but new ones replaced them. Younger people sought out Sydney's expertise, drawn by her authenticity and skill. We became inadvertent role models for other couples who'd been hiding in plain sight. "Any regrets?" Sydney asked one evening as we locked up the shop together. "Only one." "What's that?" "I wish we'd stopped hiding sooner." She kissed me under the shop's vintage sign, our future stretching before us like bolt after bolt of beautiful fabric, ready to be transformed into something extraordinary. In the end, love wasn't about finding someone to complete you, but finding someone brave enough to build something true together, despite the world's expectations.